Do you remember those unforgettable things from growing up in the 1970s? The ones that shaped your days and still linger? These memories tied toys, fashion, and family routines into community bonds. What is it about them that still connects us after all this time? Saturday morning cartoon marathons were the highlight of every child's week. Kids jumped out of bed earlier than school days, racing to the television before adults claimed it. The lineup was endless. Superheroes, talking animals, zany adventures stacked back to back. Bowls of cereal were poured, blankets dragged to the floor, the living room transformed into a weekend theater. Siblings fought for cushions, elbows flying for the front row. For a few golden hours, the television belonged to kids alone. That scarcity made it unforgettable. Long summer road trips in station wagons stretched across miles of highway and felt like adventures of their own. Families piled in with no seatbelts, just pillows, snacks, and restless kids crammed in the back. Games like I Spy, 20 Questions, and license plate spotting filled the hours. Stops turned into mini picnics, sandwiches eaten off hoods, sodas from coolers. Quirky roadside attractions, giant dinosaurs, or odd museums became unforgettable surprises. Suitcases rattled, maps guided parents, and getting lost became part of the adventure. Neighborhood kickball matches brought whole blocks of kids together until streetlights buzzed on. Someone rolled out the red rubber ball, bases marked with jackets, cars as foul lines. The game erupted, everyone welcome, from little siblings to competitive teens. Arguments ended in laughter or do-overs. Sneakers squeaked on pavement, and dogs barked at the chaos. Games stretched until dusk, when glowing streetlights signaled the final play. Sweaty, scraped, and smiling, kids trudged home with pride. In the 1970s, kickball was the soundtrack of summer. Polaroid pictures at family gatherings captured magic like nothing else. Relatives crowded kitchens and living rooms, laughing as the bulky camera clicked and spat out film. Everyone huddled close, waiting for colors to appear. Some came out blurry, ghostly, or too bright, but flaws made them treasures. Albums filled with taped Polaroids became sticky time capsules. Polaroids froze moments with honesty, smudges, and all. Looking back, they remain symbols of a time when memories unfolded slowly, right in your hands. Record players in living rooms were the heart of family entertainment. A stack of vinyl leaned against the wall, covers worn from use. Parents and kids sat together as the needle crackled and music filled the air, disco, Motown, or crooners depending on the night. Carefully lowering the needle felt like a ritual, and skipping songs was impossible, making every track familiar. Friends brought their own records, turning living rooms into shared concerts. Today's streaming is convenient, but nothing matches the warmth of vinyl spinning in a room alive with family. School milk in cartons was a universal experience of the 1970s. Lunch trays came with waxy cartons, often lukewarm and hard to open. Some kids folded them wrong and spilled, while others stabbed straws through the sides in frustration. The taste was rarely right, sour, too creamy, or just plain warm. The smell of spilled milk mixing with peanut butter sandwiches became part of cafeteria life. For many, it was more chore than treat, but it was unavoidable. Lunchrooms echoed with tearing cartons and laughter. It was not gourmet, but decades later the memory sticks, proof of how small rituals shape childhood. Brown bag school lunches with Twinkies were a classic. Bags held peanut butter or bologna sandwiches, fruit, and maybe chips, with your name scribbled in marker. The real prize sat at the bottom, a Hostess Twinkie, golden and indestructible. Sometimes flattened under an apple, it still tasted sweet. Kids traded fruit for desserts, saving Twinkies as prized currency. Lunch tables buzzed with chatter and crinkling wrappers, kids proudly showing off their treasures. Even bruised apples or soggy sandwiches could not spoil the thrill. Today's snacks are endless, but in the 1970s, nothing beat the joy of finding a Twinkie in your lunch. Cafeteria pizza squares were unforgettable. Served on plastic trays, the rubbery slices had crusts tough to cut and cheese that stretched like glue. The smell of oregano drifted through hallways, letting everyone know it was pizza day. Some folded them into sandwiches, others sprinkled crackers on top to add crunch. Even with soggy crusts, excitement turned pizza day into the highlight of the week. Lunchrooms buzzed louder, kids comparing who got the biggest square. Some swore by ranch dressing, others shook salt and pepper, but everyone agreed it was better than meatloaf. For 1970s kids, those greasy squares were legendary. Avocado green and harvest gold kitchens defined the decade. Refrigerators, stoves, and blenders all carried earthy tones, paired with patterned laminate counters and bold wallpaper. Families posed proudly in photos, colors etched into memory. These hues appeared in nearly every neighborhood, creating a look still instantly recognizable today. Appliances were sturdy, lasting for years, but the colors became icons of the era. Decades later, people groan at the sight, but for those who grew up then, avocado and gold meant home, warmth, and family meals. Bell-bottom jeans and tube socks were the fashion statement of the 1970s. Kids strutted down hallways in wide flared jeans that brushed the floor, paired with tube socks pulled high with bright stripes, jeans dragged until the hems frayed, proof of being cool, while socks peeked out in gym class or during kickball games. Parents shook their heads, insisting the styles were ridiculous, but kids wore them proudly as symbols of identity. The boldness of the look made it impossible to mistake for any other decade. Looking back, bell-bottoms and tube socks were more than clothes. They were cultural badges of individuality and youth. Christmas trees draped in silver tinsel lit up holiday living rooms across the 1970s. Families hauled out boxes filled with shiny strands, each one clinging to clothes, carpets, and even pets. Kids tossed them on by the handful, while parents tried to spread them evenly. Despite the mess, no one could deny the magic shimmer it gave the tree. Presents piled underneath, and Polaroids captured that sparkling backdrop in countless family albums. Today's trees are carefully themed, but back then, tinsel was the finishing touch that made everything feel alive. Messy or not, it was unforgettable. Neighborhood convenience stores with penny candy were childhood havens. A handful of change in your pocket felt like endless riches. Behind the counter sat jars of jawbreakers, gumdrops, licorice, and lollipops, each just a cent or two. Kids pressed faces to the glass, agonizing over choices, and every pick felt monumental. Shopkeepers usually knew every child by name, making the store feel like part of the neighborhood. The crinkle of wax paper bags and the smell of sugar made each visit special. Today's aisles are massive and prepackaged, but nothing matches the charm of penny candy. It was joy, freedom, and independence tucked inside a paper bag. Recess dodgeball games were fierce. No pads battles on asphalt playgrounds. Kids lined up on opposite sides, gripping the red rubber ball that stung on impact. The whistle blew, and chaos erupted, dodging, diving, and throwing with all the energy of youth. Welts were worn like badges of honor, proof of bravery and skill. Teachers watched from afar, rarely interfering, letting the chaos play out. Arguments ended with laughter or do-overs, and victories were forgotten quickly because the real prize was just playing. Today, many schools ban dodgeball as too rough, but in the 1970s it was a rite of passage. Sitting cross-legged for story time was a daily ritual in classrooms. Kids shuffled into rows, folding their legs crisscross applesauce, waiting as the teacher opened a book. Pages turned, voices filled the air, and even restless kids paused to listen. Teachers used character voices that brought stories alive, while the smell of chalk and crayons set the scene. The hum of fluorescent lights and the steady tick of the clock became part of the moment. For 20 minutes, the world slowed down. Story time sparked imaginations, inside jokes, and class discussions. Looking back, it remains one of the simplest joys of childhood. Typing class on clunky machines was the soundtrack of high school. Rows of heavy typewriters lined tables, their stiff keys demanding force. The clatter of keys, the ding of returns, and the slap of spacebars filled the air. Mistakes left messy scars of correction tape and erasers, but they built discipline. Fingers slipped into nonsense lines, classmates laughing, yet the pressure sharpened speed and accuracy. By year's end, fast typists were admired like athletes, measured in words per minute. Today's keyboards are soft and quiet, but those old machines taught patience, persistence, and precision. The sound still echoes in memory. Library card catalogs were the keys to knowledge. Wooden cabinets held drawers of index cards typed with authors, titles, and subjects. Students flipped endlessly, fingers smudged with ink, drawers scraping open and closed. Sometimes cards were out of place, forcing extra effort, but the reward felt earned. Each search taught patience, persistence, and pride in discovery. Librarians guided gently, showing how to navigate decimals and endless drawers. Finding a book felt like solving a puzzle, with treasure waiting on the shelves. Today, searches are instant, but in the 1970s, the journey mattered too. Those drawers now feel mythical, symbols of learning. Phone numbers and address books were staples of home life. Spiral-bound notebooks sat beside rotary phones packed with names and numbers, pages curled and ink faded, scribbled over with new addresses or birthdays. Kids copied friends' numbers into mini-books, weaving little networks of connection. Margins held doodles and smudges from hurried late-night calls. Losing a book meant losing a piece of your family's world. Flipping through tabs to find a number was a ritual every child learned. Today, phones store thousands of contacts, but in the 1970s, address books were community stitched together in ink, symbols of connection on paper. The smell of Ditto machine copies is unforgettable. Teachers cranked purple-inked masters, machines squeaking with every turn. Fresh copies came out warm, smudging on desks and fingers. Some kids secretly sniffed the pages, giggling at the sweet chemical scent. Others tucked them into binders, the smell lingering for days. That scent became inseparable from childhood, part of school's texture like chalk dust. Worksheets felt alive because they carried both words and smell. Today, printers are clean and scentless, but Ditto ink carried sensory punch. Looking back, one whiff can transport anyone instantly into a 1970s classroom. Messy, vivid, and unforgettable. Pencil cases with slide rulers were prized by school kids. Bright plastic boxes stored pencils, erasers, sharpeners, and a ruler that slid open with a snap. Even if kids did not know how to use them, they felt official. Students clicked sliders endlessly for the sound, decorating cases with stickers and scratches. Friends compared designs, proud of the smoothest slider or coolest look. For many, these boxes symbolized organization, identity, and belonging. They rattled in backpacks, a familiar sound through crowded halls. Today, kids use zip pouches, but in the 1970s, slide rule cases were badges of pride, small but unforgettable. Pop Rocks and Tang were futuristic snacks every kid had to try. Tang, the powdered orange drink used by astronauts, turned ordinary water into something bold. Pop Rocks fizzed and crackled on tongues, tiny fireworks echoing in kids' heads. Urban legends claimed Pop Rocks and soda were dangerous, daring kids to test it. Others poured whole packets at once, laughing at the noise. Tang stained lips orange, but that only added to the fun. Both felt like stepping into the future, as if space travel had landed in your lunchbox. Looking back, they remind us when even candy felt like science. Collecting aluminum cans for pocket money taught kids the value of work. Armed with bags and sneakers, they scoured ditches and ball fields, stomping cans flat with satisfying crunches. Each bagful meant coins at the recycling center. Some kids competed who could crush the most, who could fill bags fastest. Parents encouraged it, knowing it built thrift, pride, and responsibility. The recycling centers smelled of metal, but the clink of coins made every trip worthwhile. For many, it was their first taste of independence, money for candy or comics. Today, recycling feels routine, but in the 1970s, every can was sweat, effort, and reward. Skating rinks with organ music carried a wholesome charm before disco lights took over. Families laced up orange-wheeled skates and circled smooth wooden floors. The organ played steady, cheerful tunes, guiding the rhythm. Kids clung to railings, couples skated hand in hand, and falls ended with laughter. The scrape of wheels and the hum of music blended together, simple but comforting. Concessions sold sodas and popcorn, while arcades tempted kids between laps. Friday nights at the rink became the week's highlight. Later, strobes and disco balls transformed skating, but those organ years remain etched in memory, innocent, sweet, and warmly communal. Campfire songs at summer camp created lasting bonds. Kids circled fires as counselors strummed guitars and voices rose into the night. Songs like Kumbaya and Michael Row the Boat Ashore echoed through the woods. Sticky marshmallow fingers clapped along, sparks drifted upward, and shy campers found courage in singing. Bold kids led verses with pride, while the firelight made strangers into friends. Even off-key voices became part of the charm. For many, songs meant more than crafts or canoe rides. They were the heart of camp. Today, music comes from speakers, but nothing compares to those shared voices under the stars. TV stations signing off at midnight was the nightly end of an era. After the last show, screens faded to the national anthem, flags waving proudly. Then the picture vanished into static snow and hiss. Kids stayed up to watch, marveling at how TV went to sleep. Parents said it was bedtime. There was nothing left until morning. That pause made television feel special, a privilege instead of a constant stream. The eerie static filled darkened rooms, a reminder the world was resting. Today, streaming never stops, but in the 1970s, even television knew when to call it a night. Public service announcements like The Crying Indian left a lasting mark on kids in the 1970s. The haunting image of a tear falling down his cheek amid pollution seared itself into young minds, while other PSAS warned about fire safety, stranger danger, and seatbelts. They became cultural moments that taught responsibility and shaped an entire generation's outlook. Waiting all week for Happy Days or the Brady Bunch was an experience unlike anything kids know today. Primetime television shows were treated as events, not just background noise. Families would plan their evening around the broadcast, gathering together in the living room to watch the familiar characters light up the screen. Kids would talk about the episode the next morning at school, reliving favorite jokes or cliffhangers. The excitement was simple but powerful, binding families and communities through television's golden glow. Tang and space-age marketing were everywhere in the 1970s, and kids eagerly bought into it. Tang was nothing more than a powdered orange drink mix, but the commercials promised it was the same beverage astronauts drank in space. Mothers bought it for the convenience, while kids begged for it because it tasted sweet and futuristic. It was bright, sugary, and artificial, but to a child it felt like a ticket to NASA. Even decades later, the name Tang instantly brings back memories of space-age excitement. Sitting in the back of station wagons was a thrill that came with a touch of rebellion. These cars had special rear-facing seats where kids could wave, make faces, or even stick out their tongues at drivers behind them. Long road trips became adventures where the back seat felt like your own little clubhouse on wheels. The view of the world rushing past in reverse made everything feel exciting. Today it feels shocking how unsafe it really was, but at the time it was one of the best parts of childhood travel. School book fairs with scratch and sniff stickers were some of the most exciting days of the year. Kids would rush into the gym or library, clutching a few dollars from their parents, ready to shop. The fair had shiny new books, colorful pencils, erasers shaped like animals, and of course, the legendary stickers. Each one smelled like pizza, bubblegum, or grapes, and kids collected them like treasures. Even if you were not a big reader, the fun of browsing and buying something new made Book Fair Week unforgettable. Watching Schoolhouse Rock between cartoons turned learning into fun without anyone realizing it. The short animated jingles taught kids multiplication, grammar, and even American history. Parents liked it because it slipped education into weekend mornings, and kids liked it because the music was catchy and colorful. Many kids learned basic math and grammar from those clever little songs more than from their classrooms. Even today, humming one of the tunes can bring back a flood of warm memories from childhood weekends. Gas station giveaways were a strange but wonderful perk of filling up the car. Instead of just getting gas, families walked away with free glassware, stamps, or toy cars. Some stations ran promotions where you collected a whole set of drinking glasses or dishes, one at a time with each visit. Parents appreciated that every stop came with a little bonus, especially when money was tight. Looking back, it is hard to imagine a free gift with fuel, but back then it was normal and expected. Lining up for swine flu shots at school was both nerve-wracking and unforgettable. Entire classes were marched down to the gym, where nurses and volunteers stood ready with needles. Kids shuffled forward, eyes wide, trying not to cry as they watched their friends get jabbed. Some fainted, others winced, and the bravest tried to act like it was nothing. Parents trusted the schools to handle it, and most children had no choice in the matter. The memory of standing shoulder to shoulder with classmates, waiting your turn, stuck with many kids for life. It was both a medical necessity and a shared childhood trial, talked about for weeks afterward. Roller skating with metal key skates was equal parts thrilling and clunky. Before modern sneakers with built-in wheels or smooth roller rinks, kids strapped metal frames onto their shoes. A special key tightened the clamps around your sneakers, though the skates often slipped loose mid-ride. The clattering sound of metal wheels on sidewalks became a familiar summer noise. Skaters had to learn balance quickly, wobbling down driveways or practicing spins on rough pavement. Many scraped knees and elbows proved just how tough it was to master. But once you got the hang of it, flying down the street on those rattling contraptions felt like pure freedom. Collecting Wacky Packages stickers was like being part of a secret comedy club for kids. These parody stickers took everyday products, cereal, soda, or candy, and twisted them into silly jokes. Kids peeled them, traded them, and proudly stuck them on notebooks, lunchboxes, and bedroom walls. Playground swaps turned into heated negotiations, as everyone wanted the funniest or rarest design. They were cheap to buy, which made them accessible to nearly everyone, but owning the best ones made you feel rich. The humor was a little edgy for kids, poking fun at brands adults actually bought. For many, Wacky Packages were their first taste of satire, and collecting culture rolled into one. Afternoon soap operas were a steady soundtrack in many homes, especially for moms. After school, kids would often hear the dramatic music and see characters from General Hospital or All My Children flashing across the television. These shows ran for years, weaving endless stories of love, betrayal, and mystery. For children, it felt like stepping into a world of adults with problems that never seemed to end. Moms followed every twist, chatting with neighbors or friends about the latest cliffhanger. The shows became a daily ritual, filling quiet afternoons with drama and connection. Even if kids did not always understand the plot, the sight and sound of those soap operas left an impression that has lasted decades. Waterbeds were once the ultimate sign that a house was cool. Everyone wanted to flop onto the strange, sloshing surface that felt like floating on a wave. They were marketed as the future of furniture, futuristic and stylish, though often leaky and impossible to move. Kids begged friends to let them bounce, roll, or sink into the wobbling mattress. Parents worried about spills, but the novelty made them irresistible. For a short time, owning a waterbed meant you were ahead of the curve, and everyone had to try it at least once. Talking through string and can phones was pure childhood magic. 2 cans, a length of string, and suddenly kids had a private communication system stretching across backyards or bedrooms. Holding the can tight and whispering secrets felt thrilling, even if voices were muffled and hard to hear. Friends tested how far the string could stretch before it sagged or snapped. Sometimes the setup worked perfectly, sometimes not at all. But that was never the point. It was about imagination, the joy of turning trash into technology and feeling like real inventors. Neighborhood wiffle ball games turned ordinary streets into stadiums. Plastic bats cracked against lightweight balls that soared or shattered against siding, windows, or car doors. Bases were chalk marks, manhole covers, or jackets tossed on the pavement. Games often stretched until sunset, interrupted only when someone yelled, "Car!" and everyone scattered. Arguments over safe or out became part of the fun, as did switching rules to fit however many kids showed up. The sound of laughter, the dented garage doors, and the scraped knees made wiffle ball more than just a pastime. It was a piece of community childhood. The ice cream man's truck music could turn an entire neighborhood into chaos. That tinny, cheerful tune echoing down the street was like a signal only kids could hear. Bikes were dropped, games abandoned, and coins were grabbed in a mad dash toward the truck. Lining up in the heat, kids pressed their noses against the menu, debating popsicles or drumsticks. For parents, it was just a truck. For kids, it was pure magic, a roaming festival that came right to the curb. The music alone was enough to spark excitement. Viewmaster reels were a window to another world. Sliding the round cardboard disc into the plastic viewer revealed bright 3D images that seemed to jump off the tiny slides. Kids clicked through Disney characters, wild animals, or exotic destinations with wide-eyed wonder. Each turn of the wheel felt like discovering something secret and special. It was a toy, but also a way to travel without leaving home. Even today, just holding a Viewmaster can bring back that childhood feeling of awe. It was a little device that packed endless adventure into your hands. The smell of new vinyl lunchboxes is a memory locked in time. Opening a brand new lunchbox meant a wave of plasticky scent mixed with promise. Inside sat a matching thermos filled with soup or milk, alongside a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. Kids showed off their boxes with pride, cartoon characters, superheroes, or bold designs. At school, lunchboxes lined up like trophies on cafeteria tables. They were practical, yes, but they also defined style and status in childhood. That unmistakable vinyl smell remains one of the strongest sensory reminders of growing up. Sitting cross-legged on shag rugs for TV time was how families shared evenings. Sofas were often full, so kids sprawled on the floor, sinking into thick, colorful carpets. The television glowed at the center of the room, pulling everyone together for sitcoms, dramas, or Sunday specials. Popcorn bowls were passed hand to hand, and pillows became makeshift chairs. The shag rug held crumbs, static shocks, and countless hours of laughter. It may not sound glamorous now, but it was the cozy heart of home life. The floor was where family memories unfolded. Homemade Halloween costumes were stitched from creativity more than money. Old sheets turned into ghosts, paper bags into robots, and Mom's sewing machine gave life to superheroes or princesses. Store-bought costumes were rare, so every outfit felt one of a kind. Kids paraded proudly, no matter how lopsided or scratchy their getup turned out. Part of the fun was helping design and assemble the look, even if it fell apart mid-trick or treat. Those costumes carried love, effort, and imagination. Looking back, they represent a kind of holiday spirit that was as much about family as candy. Classroom film strips with the beep sound were a ritual everyone dreaded. The lights dimmed, the projector clicked, and the slow images rolled one frame at a time. At each beep, someone had to shuffle up and advance the reel, often fumbling in front of classmates. The films themselves were dry lessons on history or safety, but the experience left an impression. The hum of the machine, the boredom, and the awkward responsibility all became shared memories. Even though the content rarely stuck, the ritual of the beep was unforgettable in school life. Drinking from garden hoses in summer was an unspoken childhood tradition. Hot from running around, kids would grab the hose, turn the spigot, and gulp the warm first blast of water before the cool stream arrived. There were no water bottles, just that flexible green lifeline coiled by the house. Friends passed it around like a communal fountain, never thinking twice. The taste carried a hint of rubber and sun, but it was refreshing all the same. Nothing felt better than quenching thirst in the middle of a long summer day, straight from the garden hose. Waiting in long gas lines during the oil crisis was an unforgettable frustration. Parents would inch forward, car engines idling, as kids sat in the back seat, restless and hot. Sometimes the line stretched for blocks, and the fear was always that the pumps would run dry before it was your turn. Families packed snacks or games to pass the hours, but tempers still flared. Odd even rationing days added even more stress, and no one ever forgot the tension. For children, it was a lesson in patience and in how quickly daily life could change. Television commercials for toys you could not afford were both magical and cruel. Saturday mornings were filled with colorful ads for Stretch Armstrong, Evel Knievel stunt bikes, and Light Bright glowing in darkened rooms. The jingles stuck in your head all day, convincing you these toys could change your life. Kids begged parents relentlessly, circling catalogs and adding items to Christmas lists. Most of the time, the answer was no, and imagination had to take over. Even so, the excitement of watching those commercials was part of being a kid. They promised worlds just out of reach. Spending hours at the local public pool defined summer freedom. Chlorine stung your eyes, sunscreen filled the air, and the diving board seemed taller than a building. Kids cannonballed into the water, played Marco Polo, or floated lazily on inflatable rafts. Lifeguards blew whistles constantly, but the noise was part of the fun. Parents sat on folding chairs chatting while kids stayed in the water until their fingers wrinkled. The pool was equal parts social hub and escape from the heat. Looking back, those long afternoons shimmer with the carefree energy of childhood summers. Decorating with beaded curtains made even a bedroom doorway feel exotic. Strands of colorful beads clattered together whenever someone walked through, creating a sound that became instantly recognizable. Kids loved running their fingers through the dangling strings, watching the beads sway and sparkle in the light. The curtains did not offer privacy, but they added personality and flair. In homes decorated with shag carpets and lava lamps, they fit right in. To a child, they felt mysterious and cool, like something from another world. Even today, the memory of that clattering sound feels comforting. Reading Tiger Beat and other teen magazines was a full-blown obsession. Every issue was packed with glossy posters of David Cassidy, Leif Garrett, or the latest pop idol. Kids taped them to bedroom walls, turning plain spaces into shrines of fandom. The articles were bubbly and dreamy, promising inside secrets and love advice from stars. Friends swapped magazines or compared who had the best collection. It was about music, crushes, and the thrill of being part of a pop culture wave. Those posters and pages became part of growing up, filled with glitter and teenage daydreams. They were not just actors. They were a reflection in the mirror of every teenager who ever felt lost, loud, or completely misunderstood. The Brat Pack did not invent high school drama, but they made it feel real, electric, and terrifyingly close to home. When you watched Molly Ringwald cry in detention, it was not just acting. It was every hallway humiliation, every awkward crush, and every secret you thought nobody else could possibly understand. John Hughes gave them the scripts, but it was the actors, Emilio Estevez, Judd Nelson, Ali Sheedy, Anthony Michael Hall, who gave the 80s its voice. These films did not just entertain, they defined. The Breakfast Club was not a movie, it was a therapy session. 16 Candles felt like a personal diary read aloud. Pretty in Pink asked whether love could survive cliques in class. They gave heart to rebellion, soul to sarcasm, and face to the faceless. The Brat Pack were not perfect, but they were ours. Messy, funny, fragile, and unforgettable. Their films dared to be earnest in a time of cynicism and cool, and decades later, they still feel like a warm letter from your teenage self, sealed in a VHS case, waiting to be remembered. Smoking was everywhere in the 1980s. Not just on sidewalks or street corners, but inside diners, airplanes, grocery stores, even hospitals. Ashtrays were bolted to fast food tables. The clink of ice in a glass mixed with the flick of a lighter. Office meetings were held through a fog of cigarette smoke. Passengers lit up at 30,000 feet in a sealed cabin, and nobody said a word. There were smoking sections in restaurants, but no real barriers. Just a vague separation by aisle or air vent. It was part of the scenery, part of the culture. But today, smoking indoors is banned in most public spaces across the United States. What once symbolized adulthood now reads as a health hazard. But at the time, it was just background noise. something that hung in the curtains and clung to your coat. And if the air in those spaces was thick with smoke, it was also filled with something else that seems almost unbelievable now: medicine sold without oversight. Electric slimming belts were the miracle fitness gadget of the 1980s, or so the ads claimed. Wrap it around your waist, plug it in, flip the switch, and prepare to get electrocuted into peak physical form. These belts sent pulsing electric shocks into your abdomen under the promise of stimulating muscles and burning fat. What they really did? Cause skin burns, fainting spells, and enough emergency room visits to make the Food and Drug Administration step in. They buzzed, jolted, and sometimes sparked, especially if you were sweaty, which the instruction manual encouraged. You'd lie there, twitching like a frog in biology class, convinced the pain meant it was working. These devices became so notorious that many were banned or pulled from shelves by the late 1980s. Today's fitness tech might still overpromise, but at least it doesn't literally jolt you awake. Unless you miss the 1980s, in which case, wait until you see what they handed to kids in the toy aisle next. A survival knife inspired by Rambo. Because what could go wrong? You were not just carrying a cassette player. You were carrying a secret universe of sound, your own personal rebellion, slipped into your pocket between history class and gym. The Walkman was magic. Push play, and you were no longer in a school hallway. You were on stage, on tour, anywhere but here. Your favorite songs were loaded like weapons, tapes rewound to the best part, headphones hidden under your hoodie, the volume low enough to get away with it, high enough to drown out the boredom. But that illusion shattered the second a teacher noticed the wires. Hand it over. No warning, no sympathy. It went into the drawer, maybe for a week, maybe forever. They said it was a distraction, that it broke your focus. But really, it broke their control. The Walkman was the one thing they could not monitor. Your music, your mood, your identity, all locked behind those spongy little headphones. We weren't tuning out. We were tuning in to something that made us feel alive. It was escape. It was comfort. And when they took it away, it hurt more than just losing a gadget. Why was needing a little bit of joy seen as a threat? If the 80s had a personality, it was neon, loud, proud, and impossible to ignore. Color was not just a trend, it was a statement. And no one whispered. Leg warmers in hot pink, tracksuits in electric blue, eyeshadow that could stop traffic. The entire decade looked like it had been dipped in a highlighter and blasted with a disco ball. It was not about subtlety. It was about standing out. Walk into any mall, any gym, any music video, and it was a rainbow riot. But this was not chaos. It was confidence. Kids wore neon shoelaces. Adults rocked neon windbreakers. Even toys and commercials buzzed with that wild fluorescent glow. It was the decade where fashion turned into rebellion through brightness, because after the muted earth tones of the 70s, the 80s decided to scream. And we listened. We wore color like armor. We matched green earrings to orange belts without blinking. Fashion became a kind of freedom, to be seen, to be remembered, to be unapologetically alive. And yeah, sometimes it was ridiculous. But it was fun. It was electric. And most of all, it was a sign of the times, a wild, glowing, unforgettable beacon of 80s spirit. Driving after a few beers was seen as a minor risk, not a moral failing. In the 1980s, drinking and driving was common, so common it barely raised an eyebrow. Someone would leave a barbecue or a bowling alley, buzzed but smiling, and climb behind the wheel like it was just another Tuesday night. Sometimes they even brought a drink with them for the road, nestled between their legs or sitting in the cup holder before cup holders even existed. You might remember the clink of bottles under the seat or the faint scent of beer still on your uncle's breath as he drove you home. Nobody called it reckless. Nobody flinched. It was treated the same way as driving tired or driving in the rain. Risky, sure, but manageable if you knew what you were doing. Breathalyzers were rare. Police might give a warning, not a ticket. Getting pulled over meant a brief conversation, not a night in jail. Today, of course, the laws have changed, and for good reason. Drunk driving kills thousands. Campaigns like Mothers Against Drunk Driving helped turn the tide, showing the public what casual drinking behind the wheel really cost. But back then, it was not about recklessness. It was about a culture that had not yet connected its habits with their consequences. And if the idea of casual drinking while driving sounds dangerous now, just imagine what the air was like inside your favorite restaurant. If you were a kid in the 1970s, chugging water straight from the garden hose was basically a rite of passage. You would be out playing tag, riding bikes, or building questionable tree forts and suddenly realize you were dying of thirst. No one ran inside for a water bottle. You went for the hose. You cranked the knob, let the sun-heated water blast out for a few seconds, and then put your mouth right on the nozzle. No one asked where the hose had been or what might be growing inside it. Rubbery taste? Totally normal. Mystery specks? Built character. Parents barely noticed unless you soaked your shirt. Nobody thought twice about what kinds of chemicals were leaching from the plastic or whether small bugs had made it their home. We just drank and kept running. But when it came to food, there were rules. Except during Halloween, when those rules took a break and you took candy from strangers with zero hesitation. They weren't just toys. They were our cast of characters, our secret arsenal, our emotional support in plastic form. He-Man, G.I. Joe, Optimus Prime, tiny heroes that lived in our backpacks and pockets, pulled out during bathroom breaks or under the desk when the teacher wasn't looking. But when they did catch you, confiscated, scolded, sometimes even sent home with a note. Toys weren't allowed in the classroom. But no one bothered to ask why we brought them in the first place. It wasn't about defying rules, it was about survival. These figures were extensions of our identity, of the stories we were too shy or too bored to say out loud. They gave us power in a space where we had none. We staged epic battles under our breath during spelling tests. We gave them voices when our own felt too small. And we felt braver, funnier, stronger for it. But the adults only saw distraction, never creativity. They didn't understand that those tiny fists and molded capes helped us make sense of the world. Or maybe they did, and that's what scared them. Why did pretending make them so uncomfortable? If the 1980s had a soundtrack, it blared from a boombox. Big, bulky, and proud, the boombox was more than just a stereo. It was a statement. You carried it on your shoulder not because it was easy, but because it was loud. It was rebellion with a battery pack. Hip-hop rose from sidewalks and city blocks, and the boombox was its pulpit. Breakdancers made cardboard stages. Crowds formed like rituals. The music roared, and the city danced. These machines brought bass into backyards, rhythm into corners, and unity into chaos. Whether it was Grandmaster Flash or Run DMC, whether it was Michael Jackson or Madonna, the boombox did not care. It amplified whoever held the power cord. You controlled the vibe. And that mattered. It mattered so much. Because in an era without streaming, without smartphones, without wireless speakers, the boombox gave you freedom. The louder you played, the louder you were. It was not just about music, it was about identity, expression, and claiming your own tiny stage wherever you stood. No seatbelt use was not just common, it was practically invisible. Cars came with seatbelts, but they were rarely used. Children piled into the back seat without a second thought, curling up with pillows, playing games, or hanging their heads out the window like golden retrievers. On long trips, siblings would wrestle or lie down to nap across the entire back row. Adults, too, often left their belts untouched, especially in the front passenger seat. The seatbelt light was just an annoying feature, easily ignored. There were no alarms, no relentless dings, just silence and freedom. Many people viewed seatbelts as unnecessary unless they were driving fast or on highways. Some even believed they were more dangerous during crashes. It was not until the late 1980s and early 1990s that states began to enforce seatbelt laws. Today, it is a non-negotiable. Not buckling up can cost you money, your license, or your child's safety. But back then, you were more likely to get in trouble for forgetting to bring home milk than for not wearing a belt. And if the roads were that casual, imagine how carefree kids were on their bikes, zooming through neighborhoods without a helmet in sight. Aquanet's scented hairspray line hit the shelves in 1968, hoping to combine the hold of a hair helmet with the charm of a perfume ad. The brand was already a household name. By then, Aquanet had glued more bouffants in place than any other product on the market. But someone in marketing must have thought, you know what this cloud of chemicals needs? Flowers. So they rolled out a special line of floral-scented versions. There were rose, jasmine, even a spring breeze blend. The idea was to give users a refreshing, elegant aroma while locking their hairstyle in place for hours. But it backfired, fast. The floral notes clashed with every other scent in a person's routine. The smells mixed into something that made elevators unbearable. To make matters worse, the scent faded quickly, leaving behind the signature Aquanet chemical musk, just with a weird dying flower twist. Even die-hard Aquanet fans could not justify it. By the early 1970s, the line quietly disappeared from shelves. Aquanet stuck around, but its foray into fragrance was a short and smelly detour. But if you want a true example of how the 1960s misunderstood its audience, just look at the British bike that tried to win over American teens by shrinking everything they loved. You didn't wake up with hair like that. You earned it. With gel, time, defiance, and maybe some kitchen scissors. Punk hair in the 1980s was not an accident. It was a message. And for schools, that message was unacceptable. You could walk into class with a neatly pressed shirt and aced homework, but if your hair stood up like a rebellion, you were a problem. Dress code violation, disruptive appearance, immediate visit to the principal's office. But to us, the hair wasn't just style. It was armor. It was identity. It meant we were choosing our own narrative in a system that handed us the same bland one every day. Mohawks, bright streaks, or sculpted spikes were not distractions. They were declarations. Even if you didn't fully understand the politics of punk, you understood the power of being looked at and not ignored. And being told to fix it? That was the first time many of us learned what conformity really felt like. When did standing out become an act of disobedience? There was a time when television had limits. You watched what was on when it was on, and if you missed it, you missed it. But then came cable, and everything changed. With channels like HBO and CNN, the screen stopped sleeping. Suddenly, news was 24 hours. Movies were uncut. Content was uncensored. It felt dangerous and fresh. CNN became a window to the world, always open, always watching. For the first time, you could follow breaking news as it happened. It felt like the future. HBO, meanwhile, turned your living room into a movie theater. It was wild to see films on your own couch. No commercials, no edits. Just you, a bowl of popcorn, and a level of access that felt like magic. Cable gave you choices, dozens of channels, sports, comedy, drama, documentaries. It was not just television anymore. It was a world within a box, and it turned passive watchers into curious explorers. Kids stayed up late watching reruns they were not supposed to. Adults discovered stand-up comedy that pushed boundaries. It connected us, divided us, obsessed us, and it never turned off. Cable television was not just a new way to watch, it was a new way to live. Hitchhiking was once seen as adventurous, not reckless. People stuck out their thumbs with a smile and a sign, hoping for a ride and maybe a story. Soldiers on leave, college students on break, wanderers with a dream, they all relied on the kindness of strangers. Roads were filled with possibilities, and nobody thought twice about pulling over. You might remember watching someone hop into a stranger's car and wave goodbye, trusting the road and the driver. It was how many got from one town to the next, especially before cheap bus fares and ride-sharing apps. Parents might warn you to be careful, but that was the extent of the worry. Hitchhiking was not illegal in most places. It was resourceful. Over time, though, stories of assaults, disappearances, and crimes changed the narrative. Laws tightened. Signs went up, no hitchhiking. Now, in many states, it is restricted or outright banned. The open road closed itself off. Hitchhiking became a symbol of risk rather than freedom. But for those who once stuck out their thumb and caught a ride with a stranger, it still lives in memory as a gesture of trust. And just as strangers were trusted, so were quiet children waiting patiently in cars, alone. Muscle pants for kids, that was the pitch. Somewhere, a grown-up looked at a child and said, "You know what this kid needs? Pants that scream steroid energy." These were Zubaz-style leggings with wild patterns and stretch material designed to mimic the bodybuilding look of adult gym rats. Except they were made for children. The problem was not just the patterns, which, by the way, included everything from neon zebra stripes to camouflage lightning bolts. It was that kids had no idea how to wear them. The pants were often too tight or too loose, and they came with this weird fake athletic vibe that clashed hard with the Sesame Street lunchboxes. These pants were a hard no. Schools started quietly banning them for being distracting, and parents got tired of explaining to teachers that no, their child was not training for a junior weightlifting championship. They were just victims of 1980s fashion. The trend came and went faster than you could say bicep curl. But speaking of trying too hard to look futuristic, let us talk about the time Atari thought your forehead could play video games. They were sparkly. They were translucent. They were everything a pair of sneakers was not. Jelly shoes, made of soft, colorful plastic and always one size too uncomfortable, were a staple of every 1980s kid's wardrobe. You wore them because they made you feel like you were walking on glitter. And then you wore them to gym class, which was your first mistake, because those magical little shoes turned into slipping hazards on polished floors. PE teachers didn't care that they were fashionable. They cared that you were a lawsuit waiting to happen. You'd be benched, sent to the nurse, maybe even have to call home for real shoes. But we loved the way they caught the light when we walked. They made you feel like a disco ball on the playground. Some kids even matched them with scrunch socks just to double down on the statement. You could hear them squeak down the hallway like a fashion warning siren. Wearing jelly shoes was like saying, "I know these aren't practical, and I don't care." But we wore them anyway, because jelly shoes were not about comfort. They were about style, expression, standing out. You weren't wearing shoes. You were wearing a statement, and every time they told you to take them off, it felt like being told to tone yourself down. They weren't just unsafe, they were unacceptable. Too shiny, too loud, too fun. But you wore them because you knew that feeling good about how you looked was worth the risk. When did joy start needing adult approval? No one was ready. Not the music industry, not the public, not even the moon, which he would soon walk across. In 1982, Michael Jackson released Thriller, a title that would come to define the very heartbeat of pop culture. This was not just an album, it was a tidal wave. Every track felt like it could carry its own legacy, but it was the music video, the short film really, that sent shockwaves through every living room in America. Red leather jackets, ghoulish dance moves, Vincent Price's eerie monologue echoing into a generation's dreams. It was scary. It was sexy. It was genius. Thriller redefined what a pop star could be. Michael was no longer just a singer. He was a world builder, a visual storyteller, a phenomenon. He shattered racial barriers on MTV, igniting a cultural shift that went beyond music. Parents, kids, teens, grandmothers, everyone danced, everyone watched. Thriller became a global obsession, and suddenly Halloween had a new anthem: the glove, the lean, the laugh. It was not just entertainment, it was an event. To be alive in the 80s was to live in the shadow of Thriller. And to this day, nothing has ever moved quite like it. Letting kids ride standing up in the back seat was not just overlooked. It was often encouraged. The space between the two front seats was a coveted spot, a mini stage where children stood to give directions, tell stories, or just feel taller. It felt like driving without actually driving. Parents drove with one arm loosely draped over the passenger seat while a child stood between them, gripping the dashboard, peering out at the road like a co-pilot. In the back, kids slid across vinyl seats, bounced with each turn, or lay down and stared at the ceiling. There were no reminders to buckle up, because buckling up was not yet a rule. It was a nuisance. The seatbelt often stayed buried beneath the cushions or was jammed into the crack between the seats. Today, it is illegal for a child to ride without a proper car seat or restraint. Parents now face fines, or worse, for what was once everyday family travel. But back then, riding unrestrained was just another way to feel free. There was trust, or maybe just oblivion. Either way, it was the norm. And if today's laws would call that reckless, the next parenting habit would cause even more of an uproar. It took place in plain sight, often with a crowd watching. Back before Halloween became a yearly anxiety fest, taking unmarked candy from a neighbor was just how the night worked. You rang a doorbell, yelled, "Trick or treat," and got handed whatever someone had lying around. Loose jelly beans? Great. Homemade fudge and wax paper? Even better. The idea that candy needed to be sealed and tamper-proof had not fully caught on yet. No one was worried about needles or poison. Your biggest fear was getting a box of raisins. Parents did not comb through your haul under a flashlight. They just told you not to eat it all at once. The neighbor handing out popcorn balls or wrapped caramels was not suspicious. They were the cool house. Trust was the currency of the neighborhood, and if someone put effort into a treat, you respected it. Now, we wrap everything in layers of packaging and double-check labels like candy is a security threat. And after all that sugar buzz, you already knew where the real party was, under a disco ball, skates on, and lyrics your parents probably should have listened to more closely. You did not just wear parachute pants, you arrived in them. The swish-swish sound with every step announced your presence like a theme song. Bright colors, dozens of zippers, and sometimes even reflective panels, they were a walking protest against beige conformity. We saw them in music videos, on breakdancers, and in our wildest daydreams of being someone cool. Wearing them to school felt like crossing an invisible line. You knew you might get sent home, and that was part of the thrill. The rulebook said they were distracting or gang-related, but what they really meant was these pants gave kids confidence they were not supposed to have. You couldn't sit quietly and go unnoticed in parachute pants. That was the point. You became loud. Visually and literally, you became someone to look at. You were daring the world to try and tone you down. Some teachers rolled their eyes. Others wrote you up. But you didn't care. Because in those pants, you weren't just another student. You were a renegade. You were a performer. You were a billboard for your own identity. In a decade obsessed with appearances, you finally had something to say. Why was wearing confidence something to be punished? It was supposed to be a triumph, a shining moment of American progress, a teacher going to space, children watching in awe, dreams being launched with rocket fuel and faith. But on January 28, 1986, the sky betrayed us. The Challenger space shuttle broke apart 73 seconds after liftoff. What followed was not just shock, it was heartbreak. Across the nation, classrooms had tuned in to watch history. Instead, they witnessed tragedy. There were no words, just smoke trails and silence. For many, it was the first time the future felt fragile. Space had always seemed limitless, glamorous, heroic. Now it felt human, and humans break. The loss of 7 brave souls, including Krista McAuliffe, the first civilian chosen to fly, cut deep. The optimism of the 80s paused. We asked questions. We mourned. We learned how grief moves through television wires and into living rooms. The Challenger tragedy was not just an event, it was a scar. And like all scars, it reminded us of both our ambition and our limits. In the years that followed, space exploration would continue, but never with the same wide-eyed innocence. The sky was still beautiful, but we understood now. Beauty does not always mean safety. Parents spanking kids in public did not invite whispers or legal warnings. It earned nods of approval. In the 1980s, discipline happened wherever it was needed. At the grocery store, in parking lots, outside churches, in schoolyards. If a child misbehaved, parents corrected them on the spot. A quick swat to the backside or a firm grip on the arm was considered loving firmness, not abuse. Older folks would even say, "That child will thank you one day." The phrase, "spare the rod, spoil the child," was not just quoted, it was lived. Nobody called the authorities. Teachers spanked students too. It was woven into the culture of consequences and correction. Today, that same act is considered public violence by many. It can lead to police reports, social worker visits, or even legal charges. And yet, for many who grew up back then, it was the way boundaries were taught. A smack on the bottom followed by a stern look was how parents said, "I love you enough to correct you." Right or wrong, it was real. But for a generation that was spanked in the cereal aisle, there was another truth. Most of them never buckled up in the car ride home. Looking back on these 1970s memories, share in the comments which one still lives in your heart. Tap like if it brought back even a smile, and subscribe so you can keep reliving the moments that made growing up unforgettable.